All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here to, let's see, I need a clicker, or at least if I can do it. Can do that. Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead. Go ahead to the next slide. It's going to come at you. Here it comes. All right, we're going to bring this into implementation. We are, as you heard Clive talk about, we need to get data, and this mission is coming up soon. It's planned to launch the end of 2024. We launch it around November for the summer season in the polar regions. If many of you are familiar with the mission, hit maybe 3 times. No, I mean, next slide. 3 times. Yep. So characterizing polar volatiles, water obviously is an important one, and then collect information for future ISRU endeavors. And this is, we need to understand at the ground level where what the concentration is, what the distribution is, and one of the other important aspects is to be able to correlate that to more global resources, especially in the polar regions. And I'll show a little bit about, the methods we use to decide where to go and what to characterize and how we can maybe apply that then to other regions. Because as was mentioned, we can only go to a limited spot. Although we will cover a lot of area. We will do a lot of maneuvering now that it's coined. Yeah, go ahead, next slide. All right, just some quick stats overview if you haven't seen this at some recent conferences, but so it's a pretty big rover. We're probably a bit heftier than that now. We're probably getting closer to 500 kilograms. Power, we have the solar arrays with 3 sides covered on the rover. We can generate about 450 watts if we're on a corner. Communications, or it's X-band. You can see the size there. It's pretty big. There's a few pretty high fidelity models that have been built in our various places, in conferences and things, if you ever see one. The wheels are pretty big, about 1/2 meter wheels that has grown as we've gone through in development, but it's a matter of being able to navigate hazards, and steering. Each wheel can independently steer, but we usually generally coordinate them. But we can crab, so if you want to keep the panels on the sun, it can kind of crab drive. We are limited, not done yet. Go back. It's okay. We're limited. Our speed we try to limit because we are collecting data as we move. We're using a neutron spectrometer in prospecting mode, so we don't want to go too fast. Going too fast is also harder to design for. But we can quote double our blistering speed if we need to, if we want to get noisier data. We are telerobotic, so it's needs communications all the time. It's waypoint driving, so it's instead of like Mars rover, they generate like a day's worth of sequences and it autonomously moves around. We are kind of driver science ops team in the loop, real time, and we usually make about a few meters command, and the rover will travel that distance. We get a new set of data, evaluate the next step, select the next step, and continue on. So it's an interesting operational paradigm that we have scientists looking at data real time. We have operators and drivers evaluating data and seeing what we're getting from the instruments compared to our plan, and able to replan as needed, or revector to interesting things we're seeing, or trends we're looking at. So it's kind of a new untested way of operating that we're practicing a lot as we get prepared to do it. Cameras up top on the mast create stereo data sets. Our slope capability, we limit to about 15 degrees operational. We can handle more, but it's trying to create some margin in there. And then obstacles, about 20-centimeter rocks, craters we can go into of limited size because you get bigger craters, you get bigger slopes. And then we will be exploring permanently shadowed regions. So it's going to get cold. You heard the ACT presentation where they talked about some of the design to allow us to survive in cold areas as well as hot areas. It's one of the big design challenges for any lunar mission. All right, next chart. So Viper is going to be delivered to the moon using the Eclipse lander. Astrobotic was selected. Their Griffin lander will be taking us to the moon, and they're well on their way in their development. It's an interesting way. You see a traditional kind of ramp egress. We have two directions, so provides a little bit of redundancy. But it's a new thing to be partnered with Eclipse, especially for something the size of Viper, and we work closely with them to make sure that the coordination is going to happen for while we're combined on the way to the moon, and then obviously to execute this, we're planning closely to make sure it's done safely and quickly. Next chart. Talk a little bit about the instruments. Go ahead and click a few times here. One more. And one more. So from a data collection standpoint, you don't necessarily think about an IMU or cameras in terms of science instruments, but obviously they are important data sets that are not necessarily the primary data sets that we're looking for as we rove around. We have the prospecting instruments, the spectrometers, but the IMU and the cameras will add context to the data sets that we get. And then of course, Trident drill, which is going on prime before Viper and a static lander, and then on Viper here, allows us subsurface access. It's up to 1 meter. And so as we prospect and collect data as we're driving with the neutron spectrometer, which is surface and subsurface, kind of bulk water content, and the spectrometer is looking at the surface, the nervous spectrometer, and M-Solo, which is detecting volatiles that are outgassing. Then we can use the Trident drill, and we can pull material up from subsurface, evaluate it with the spectrometers, so that we're getting kind of ground truth, not just from what we're sensing remotely, but pulling it up at different depths under the surface. Next chart. Okay, this is a view of the mission area for Viper. This is where we are going. This is the Nobile region in the South Pole. As kind of aerial view, I think it's really amazing to see. This environment is one that we've never been to before, and it looks really cool. And there's a lot of things that about the geography, if you will, of this area that make it interesting from a resources point of view. And this is one of the reasons why we're going there. There's lots of reasons. One is, well, you see the colors, or I'll talk more about those. Those are important to us because they are different expected concentrations of ice being stable at different depths. So you kind of see the gray normal areas. Those are areas where we wouldn't expect water to be stable thermally within the first meter. And then you get into yellow, which is maybe it's within the first meter, green within the first half meter, and red could be stable on the surface. And that would correspond in this picture with permanently shadowed regions. So obviously in this image, really close together, there are a lot of varying environments that once we visit, we can see, are we seeing correlation between these environments in different areas, maybe understanding where they are with respect to the geography, the the slopes, the mountains, the sun angles, and actually seeing if there are patterns. And this is one way where we can, if we use these kind of maps and we find correlations with the data, we can then, extrapolate and apply that to maybe other regions on the moon that have similar, expected high concentrations of water ice or other volatiles. The yellow regions on this slide is another important aspect for planning a mission in the South Pole. These yellow, bright yellow, are what we call safe havens. It depends on the design capabilities of whatever system you're putting in, but in our case, our system has the capability to survive 50 hours, so a little over 2 days of shadow, which means it's getting really cold and we have to provide heat to keep things from breaking. So these locations are areas where, another important point is that as a telerobotic mission, we are dependent on communications. So currently there's no relay assets for the United States, which hopefully is remedied soon, but it's not an asset that we could take advantage in our planning and execution. So we have to have line of sight to Earth to move. So every 2 weeks, we lose line of sight to Earth, just the natural orbital mechanics. And we are stationary for 2 weeks. So finding a place where you can sit for 2 weeks on the South Pole and remain in the sun is not straightforward. So these locations are places that we found that you can sit for 2 weeks and you will not see a shadow for longer than 50 hours. There are locations here that don't see any shadow for those 2 weeks. There are locations that see varying shadows of duration, but the limit there is 50 hours for us. Nicely in this area, which is one of the reasons we selected it, is not only are there many of those locations, but they're close to the scientifically areas of interest. You can see why this is one of the high priority targets from a scientific and a practical mission implementation point of view. The next slide is a kind of more of a ground view. This is, I think, is an interesting aspect angle. You can kind of see a Viper rover down there of a small size. It gives you a good context of the size of these mountains and craters, and kind of an interesting way to see it. In this image, along a reference traverse, we would be exploring those yellow and green and red. You can see, of course, think permanently shadowed regions. If they're too big, you can think there's huge slopes, or you lose line of sight to Earth, you get down in it. So in this case, right, taking advantage of, there's gentle approaches, there's line of sight to Earth, things work out. I mean, this has been many years of traverse planning and understanding the regions of interest and the capabilities of the rover all mixed together. Next chart. An example traverse, you may have seen similar things like this, and anybody trying to plan a rover mission in the South Pole is going to have charts like this, where here's a planned. It's a total time of 3 or 4 months. So what you can't appreciate in a chart like this is the changing illumination of the sun and calm, and you don't see any slopes, but the traverse is in time progressing along these paths and staying in sunlight, or solar powered rover, and we have the limitations of how long we can go in shadow. This is just an example, but you can see, we're trying to cover a lot of area. We're trying to investigate the different thermal ice stability regions and go into PSRs, and also go to other locations. We want to geographically separate our measurements to see if there's, again, correlation between what's expected by something like this, by a map like this. And then again, trying to get the most data for the time that we have, which is limited to really the summer season, because once you get out of the summer season and you're sitting for 2 weeks, you will experience shadows that are too long, and the rover will die. So we have a limited time, and we have to make progress. It's a very important aspect of polar missions, depending on the infrastructure. If there's comm relays, it kind of changes the game a bit. If there's nuclear power sources, it changes the game a little bit. But of course, you have the objectives you're trying to meet and the constraints of your project that you have to deal with. Next chart. I think it wasn't on the front page of objectives for Viper, but I think this is one of the most important, again, along with collecting the data, right, which is important to the future, is learning how to actually operate and actually going to the South Pole. We've never been. And so we have been doing a lot of testing, obviously, as we're approaching our integration. So hardware is designed, a lot of it is built, and integration is imminent. So we've done a lot of testing to make sure that we are capable to do what we are intending to do. So getting into these environments that we're going to see, extreme temperature swings we're familiar with, dust mitigation. And if you can see in the middle picture, there's a hazard camera image of a wheel with a sock on it, if you will. We've done a lot of life testing, and we've sandblasted it and done a lot of everything we can on Earth with simulant. And obviously with the traverse planning is a very integrated thing between the design of the rover and the physics of where you're going, the sun and the slopes and other limitations, hazards, rocks, craters, slopes. You could even lump regolith, not getting stuck. You can see the video playing over there is sped up. This is at the Slope Lab at Glenn, and done a lot of mobility, testing and VNV. The unit you see there, that's called our Moon Gravity Relative Unit, which we call MGRU. And it's basically, we can't operate our flight vehicle in 1G gravity. So this unit is at moon gravity, but with the flight like actuators, and all of its design capabilities. You see here, we're doing some downslope testing and going over rocks under one wheel. So we obviously have a whole test campaign that we go through to verify that the expected performance and the requirements we have on the rover mobility system are going to be achieved. And we continue to do tuning of the suspension and other things. One of the unique challenges for designing something at the moon is not getting stuck in regolith. Depending on, we don't exactly know what to expect. There's uncertainty, I think, in the permanently shadowed regions of how the regolith is compacted, how the lack of thermal cycling might affect the regolith. So we have capability that is not necessarily in other planetary rovers to try to make sure that that's not going to ruin our day or our month. And we've been developing over a long period of time different ways of using the capabilities of this adjustable suspension, explicit steer rover, and to be able to get us out of sand traps or lag. The next chart, you'll see some of that testing. It's a video. This is what you don't want to see when you're on the moon. Basically, just digging yourself in and not making any progress. And this is why the health people don't like you to test with lunar simulant. You see the people wearing the hoods. And then I think the next video, this is breaking the computer. Not playing very smoothly. But this is an alternative motion using the suspension. sometimes described as inchworming, and you can see it actually making progress just fine in the same environment. So Viper, I mean, this is, you know, we're pretty far along, and we're approaching integration, and then, you know, it goes on to Astrobotic to integrate into the with the lander, and then on the launch vehicle and launch. So there's, you know, we're kind of on the path now, but there is a lot that that has enabled us to get to this point. This is not anyone familiar with actually flying a mission that was there from the start of the concept knows that it takes a long time and a lot of investment. I know we're here talking about different technologies and how to start to think about them to be a future application. There's been, I'd say, over a decade at least of direct investment, technology investment into things that have that will enable Viper. Some of the Resolve project that was kind of initially thinking about how do we prospect on another planetary body, what data sets, and how do we operate, and how do we collect what kind of instruments, and to Resource Prospector, which kind of said, okay, let's take that and formulate a mission, an actual mission, and further design, mature that concept. RP15, I'll mention it because I'm talk about it a little bit more, mission in a year. And then, of course, the instruments that are primary instruments on Viper have had continued investment for a long time throughout the decade. And it's actually been a very big benefit because the instruments have been very, very far along, which is always good. Instruments can cause you trouble, especially as you try to get them ready for delivery and verifying and finalizing it. But because of these investments over a long period of time, the instruments are very mature. They're manifested on earlier missions, and that's always a bonus to not have to worry as much about the instruments. The rest of the rover is another case. The supply chain is not nice right now. Our RP15, I wanted to note this because I thought it was one of the very important ways of maturing a concept, especially a flight mission concept. We basically went from a high level mission objectives, what are you trying to do and what are your constraints, to requirements, design, build, and operate the ground prototype in 1 year. So we did the whole kind of NASA life cycle in a year, and we ended up out, we were at the JSC Rock Yard and operating it from Ames on the lower right picture there. All this hardware was developed, was designed and built in a year. We had an ETU of the drill. Really fast-paced maturation of the hardware concepts. You know, you get experience actually flowing requirements to hardware designs, which can trip you up in a lot of cases. And then you know, you get a really good understanding of interfaces. And of course, you can imagine this is an incredible team building experience, especially if you can keep the team together and momentum as you go from formulation to flight. I think that's my last slide.